What's up, friends? Today we are starting a brand new build series, and it's been a while since we've been able to do one, so I am really excited. As the keen-eyed among you might have noticed, there is a bunch of parts on the table, and these parts are most commonly used to build a race board, and it is time for that. In this video, we're going to be going over all of the parts for this build and starting the drivetrain assembly. So buckle up and get ready for an awesome build series. Alright, so one thing you're probably thinking right now is, what makes a race board a race board? Well, for me, there's a couple things that define a race board. One of those is that it must be able to go fast, and I say that because a lot of boards just really can't make it too much over 30. And for a build like this, my aim is to go 40 to 50 miles an hour to keep up with those specialty built stooge riders, and I think that is totally possible with the right amount of rider skill and the right components. So must be able to go fast. Second, it must be able to accelerate quickly, aka be quick. And that's very important because even on short track, getting up to speed is something that's very important to keep you ahead of the others. Third, it's got to have the right drive system, and included with that is the trucks. You've got to be able to have a stable base that you can adjust and learn and grow into over the time that you race your board. And right now, I think the best thing that you can do is to get 3-link trucks from Stooge race boards. So with that short definition of a race board out of the way, let's talk about the components. I'm going to go through each component in this video and kind of give a short little stint on it as the intro video. And we're going to start off with the trucks. And I'm probably going to put B-roll over this because I can't really show you guys everything from my chair here. So we have 2 of these Stooge race boards 3-link trucks. Now, these are kind of complicated to understand, but essentially you have a Heim bolt that goes through the base plate, which mounts to the board, and this bolt has an eye in it. This eye has a, I believe, spherical bearing in it, where the axle travels through, and then you have 2 bushings here that prevent it from going left, right, forwards, back, and side to side. Attached to this axle are 2 links, and these links are fixed on each end and attached to the base plate in a variable position. These links have spherical bearings in the corners, and that allows them to rotate around as the truck rotates. It'll make more sense once they're on the board and you can see it turning left to right, but essentially the special thing about Stooge trucks is that they have the ability to go very fast without getting speed wobbles, and they have the ability to be tuned to be super turny and predictable. So for me, this is the best choice, and they cost a decent amount of money, but for me, it's going to be worth it. And I intend to conquer the Eastgate racing scene and become one of the best. That's my goal. So yeah, next up our powertrain. So powertrain is very important on a race board, and this is one of the things that will probably be changing over time. I should also mention a lot of this board will change over time, but to start, we've got 2 FlipSky 6384 motors in 170 kV, and that gives a great balance between speed and torque out of the motor itself, and that will be paired with a 14S battery. The 14S battery is a 14S 8P battery built by SkyArt Power, and I acquired it as part of a deal with the deck that I bought. And this battery is made of cells that are, you know, Tesla cells is what they call them, but they're just Panasonic 21700 cells, and they have extremely high capacity. So I go really, really far with this pack. The only problem is it doesn't output a lot of current. Now, this is another thing that will probably change over time, but these are the parts that I have. We're going to start here, and then you guys will witness the journey of me upgrading and making this board even better. So they don't put out a ton of current, and once we get to the configuration video, I'll tell you exactly how much. But That's your battery and the motors. Between the battery and the motors, we've got speed controllers. And I say controllers because I have two Maker Apps XM100 ESCs. And these things are tiny. This is another component that I'm going to be upgrading later this year to a brand new ESC called the SKP Solo. And it's an incredible controller, but it's very expensive. And I don't have it right now. So we're starting with these because they can take the 14S easily, and they should have enough power to deal with the output that this battery can provide. Next up, we've got the drivetrain. So the motors will be connected to a Board Dynamics straight cut AT drivetrain. And the ratio on this baby is 3.8, which gives a good balance of torque and power in combination with the motors. So got straight cut gears, all steel, going to be very loud and obnoxious, but who cares? It's a race sport. All the rest of this stuff here is just all the components from that. I'm intending to use this Wave RX iRemote with this race board because it has a lot of throw on the throttle, and I believe it will feel very nice and controllable. That will be in conjunction with the iLogger, which I'm going to pull out of my mountain board because I've just not been utilizing it properly. So that's pretty much all of the components except for the deck and enclosure and wheels. So deck, we've got the Red Ember 44. This is a huge deck with a lot of good camber to it, and it's a really popular platform for high-speed builds because it just holds up really well. It's super solid and it has good grip on it in terms of the concave. Paired with that is an eBoards Peru enclosure for the Red Ember 44, and this thing is just absolutely beautiful. I'll be sure to put some B-roll here, but just looks so good. It's insanely strong, and big shout out to Alan for making such a quality product to be able to show off my awesome board. Now, I think that's pretty much everything except for the wheels. I'm not completely decided on the wheels yet. I have some Meepo tubeless wheels that I might use in conjunction with their tubeless tires, and that's one option. Another option is Board Dynamics GT3 wheels with the BKB tires, and I think that's what I'll be starting with because I already have those set up and they have the right size bearings and everything. If you don't know, these Stooge trucks have 10mm axles, so you'll have to switch your bearings if you have smaller ones or bigger ones. So that's pretty much all the parts. Hopefully you guys found that useful, and I'm really excited to build this. To be honest, it's been a while since I've done an actual build. I've just been doing batteries and all kinds of other stuff like that, but it's time to finally do this build and get started with the racing scene. With all that parts introduction out of the way, our next step is to actually start assembling the mechanical parts, and that will start with the drive system. So we're going to go ahead and mount up the trucks onto the deck, and then we'll start assembling the Board Dynamics drives. It shouldn't be too bad. The system to connect to the 3 links is interesting and might require a little bit of finagling. You might notice if you're very keen-eyed, whoops, I've got 2 different hangers here, well, 2 different axle hangers. I don't know what to call them, it's confusing, but the rear one is actually a thinner axle because that's what works with the Board Dynamics system. If I end up breaking this down the road or bending it or something, I'll upgrade to the thicker one, which is like the 2nd generation, called the HD version. It has a much thicker axle. If I need to, I'll upgrade to that later, but I will have to modify these pieces with a different size thread and bore it out a little bit. So conquer that when I get to that, but for now we're going to assemble it on the OG quote-unquote hanger, and let's get started. Before we go on to the actual build part, I just want to briefly mention this again. I am going to be changing this build a lot, and one of those things in particular is going to be the coloring. And I've got a whole color scheme planned out for this. I want to skin the deck and stain it and do all kinds of stuff, but right now it's important for me to get this assembled. So we're going to be assembling this with a blank deck and just plain trucks, plain motors, plain drives. And once I get the time, then we'll make it look a lot better. But for now, we're gonna keep it like this. All right, so we're gonna be mounting up the trucks, and I've got some M5 bolts here. I'm gonna use some washers for now. I'm still looking for a rear anti-sync plate, so if you guys have any suggestions for who I should get one from, drop them down in the comments below. Right now, I've got M5x40 bolts, which are extremely overkill and go way past where they need to, but that's the length that I have at the moment, so we're just gonna use them. So let's just get this fastened up. On the front truck here, you'll see we have a slightly different situation going on. And a little while back, I won this Hoyt Street battery meter from a design contest for anti-sync plates. So I have right here a 3D printed version of the anti-sync plate, one of the ones that I designed for the competition. And I would like to use the Hoyt battery meter on the race board because I don't really want to put a DeVega on here because I think it'll distract me and I'll just want to look down and see how fast I'm going. I'd rather just see how fast I'm going in my logs and focus entirely on racing. So I think we'll be putting the battery meter here. So temporarily, at least, I'm going to be installing this 3D printed version here. And technically, this should be fine to just go on here, but I also don't really want my truck to break off, so I'll be reconsidering and possibly getting a machined one for the final build. But you never know. In e-skate, most of the time, things that you don't plan on leaving on, they stay on your build for a long time, so we shall see what happens. You might be wondering what the extra 2 holes are on the front of this anti-sync plate are for. And it's for an XMount. You can pick these up at Xboard. Use my code RBEM to get a discount. I am still affiliated with Xboard, still wear their jackets and gloves all the time. They make great stuff. So if you need something to attach your GoPro with, you should pick up one of the XMounts. Pretty affordable too. All right, so there's a couple parts that work together to make the Board Dynamics drives work on these 3-link trucks. The first part is this nut. This is very important. This is a gigantic lock nut, and essentially is what does a lot of the holding power to hold the drive in place and keep it from rotating. This does work in conjunction with a couple other things though. And one of those is this threaded plate. This plate is what attaches to the motor mounting plate and connects that to the truck. This is threaded inside with the appropriate thread. It goes onto the truck, and threads on, all the way till where it stops because the thread runs out inside. Now, this nut will be on the thread already, and then you will tighten it down to lock it against this kind of collet adapter, if you will. And the locking pressure between this nut and this adapter is part of what keeps this whole thing in place. The other part that keeps it in place is the axle nut. If you've ever run normal Board Dynamics drives, you'll know that they just slide on and then the axle and the wheel nut hold them in place. and that's why it's important to have a spacer in your back wheel with Board Dynamics drives. So for these, it is no different. The axle nut and the spacers, we're just going to stick these on here for example. Press against the adapter and against this, and all of that keeps this from being able to translate right and left, which is how it would come off of the truck. So I'm not 100% sure that this will never move, but I'm fairly confident that it shouldn't have any problems, at least not with this setup as it is right now. So let's go ahead and get into assembling. All right, so we're about to, I say about to because we're going to do it on camera now, we're about to assemble the Board Dynamics drives onto the rear stooge truck, and I just wanted to show you that I had to set this up on here beforehand to make sure I understood exactly how it was going to go together. So I'm going to do my best to try and explain how these go together because it might be a little bit confusing looking at it for the first time. So I'm going to take this off and then we'll put it back on and I'll explain as I do it. All right, so as I mentioned, this nut needs to go on first. I've actually already threaded this nut on all the way in order to cut threads into the nylock because I want to put the nut on this way to give it more of a surface to press against the collet adapter. So I'm going to try to thread this on in reverse, which hopefully isn't a bad idea, into the threads that I created already. Yeah, that's not going to work. Well, according to Board Dynamics, I talked to him about this. It's okay to have it the other way, but it does feel kind of weird to me. So, I don't know. All right, that should be enough. Now, we'll go ahead and screw this on. Nope, just kidding. Make sure you put the plate on, otherwise you're going to have a bad day when you realize that you have to unscrew it all. Screw that on. Now that'll tighten down and it'll stop. What I recommend is that you take this opportunity to tighten down the nut a little bit before you lose access, or easier access rather. So actually have to loosen this to get it closer. You should be able to see on the other camera. And that is backed up right to it. And then go ahead and take the plate, and I'm going to use one of the screws, not the proper one for the plate, one of the M4 screws, thread it in here. So as to get a little bit of leverage to tighten the collet down. That is quite tight right there, actually. I think that is about the right position as well, because we have to position these motors such that they clear the 3-link, or the link of the 3-link, but also so that they have ground clearance. Honestly, I somehow managed to nail that pretty much perfectly. So now we have a fairly tight setup, I would say. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Yeah, it feels pretty tight to me. So now, got that all done. So next up, I think what I'm going to do is mount up the motor and locate all the hardware that this mounts with. Okay, so we've got our 3 M3x8 screws here. Make sure you don't use the 10 ones because the 10s will be too long and they'll protrude through. Now I've got all 3 of those down. Go ahead and set the gear onto the collet. This can be a little bit tricky depending on how your tolerance is. Some are tighter than others. That was a pretty nice fit for me. Although we are hitting the screws, so that is quite unfortunate. Okay, I figured it out. I accidentally grabbed M3x10s out of the bag instead of M3x8. They were not labeled, so. With those now installed properly, we can stick the gear on. Slide it on. And now we have no problem. Now with that gear on, we can go ahead and mount the motor. Now the motor mounting will be done using 4 more of the M4x8 stainless bolts. So we'll go ahead and get those in there. Actually, it looks like we'll probably need to take the gear off to get at the other slot. Okay, all 4 screws are screwed in, and you want to remember to leave them a little bit loose because we need to set the backlash for the gears. So we'll go ahead and stick our gear back on, which is somehow harder this time. Now we can go ahead, stick on our motor gear, and we can set the backlash. This is a little bit difficult because there's a little bit of wobble in this gear. It looks like we're going to have to do some modification to get this gear ratio to work, which is highly unfortunate, but I was slightly worried about this, so we're gonna have to extend the slots in the drive here. Okay, well, this video just got longer. It's a little bit hard to see, but back here underneath the motor is the link for the truck, and if you tighten this too much in the wrong spot, the motor will hit the link. So in this situation, I'm going to move this back 1 joint and then reattach it and tighten it down. We're gonna have to use the nut instead, which is fine since it's a 2-part system. Well, it is now tight, and I can go all the way to the base position and all the way out. Perfecto. All right, next one. All right, so here we have the 2 plates mounted up. You can see the other one back there. They're not quite aligned, as you can tell by the motors. So what I'm gonna do is flip the board over and try and fix that real quick. All right, so this one is the one that we just did because we were flipped over. So I like the position of this other motor better, so we're going to push this one up a little bit to give it a little more ground clearance. That just moved it. Perfect. Now remember, just because I'm moving this right now with the wrench does not mean that the motors will be able to move it, because once the wheels are on here, this should not be able to translate because of the force going in this way. So there we go, got the wrench, locked it down. Now they are aligned. Next step, we're going to go ahead and put the gears on and set the backlash on them, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. All right, so wheel gear, you're gonna slide on here. There you go. And now I want the pinion gear. Pinion gear goes on here. And I already know that I need to go pretty much all the way to the bottom. So I can just squish this down all the way. Make sure these are loosened a little bit. Squish this down and tighten them up. This is why I opened those slots. You can tell that this is all the way to the back. And that's a little bit looser than I would like, but I'm not taking that all apart again. If I have problems later, I'll fix it then. Oh, wait. Maybe these are tightened down too much, that's why. Ah, there we go. That's a little bit better. There we go. So I'm gonna try to get a little closer here so you can see the backlash. Here you can see the gears, and you want just the tiniest bit of click. Too much, it'll wear the gears too fast and risk breaking a tooth. Too little, you'll have more rolling resistance and again, wear the gears too fast. This is about where you want to be. I thought about this a little bit, and since I've got the gears set in the place, or the motor set in the place that I need for the gears, I'm going to put some Loctite on these bolts. And for this application, I'm going to use a small drop of red Loctite 271 because I don't want them to come loose. But I'm also going to paint a bunch of stuff later, and I'm most likely going to need to take the motors off. So we're just going to go with this small drop and hope that it won't be stuck too permanently. And we'll do this for each of the motor screws and then give it a nice torque down, being careful because these are stainless fasteners. All right, so I put red Loctite in all 4 screws on this side and all 4 on the other side. So now it's time to mount up the gears. And for this, you're going to want to use green Loctite, 638 or 648 typically. And I'm just going to give the motor shaft a real quick clean with some isopropyl alcohol to make sure it is free of any oils that might have gotten on it from either flip sky or me handling it. And sometimes you can rough this up with some sandpaper to make it stick even better, but this isn't a helical gear, it's straight cut, so I'm not super worried about that. So with the Board Dynamics motors, which are pre-cut to the correct length, we have a little tiny key. We'll go into the keyway on the motor shaft, and it will fit perfectly in there. And then the only thing left to do is position the gear in and out how it's supposed to be. So, going to go ahead and put on the wheel gear so we know where to align it with, and then put some green Loctite into the key way, and then we're going to put Loctite on the shaft. And this amount that I'm putting on should be plenty. Again, this is not a helical gear, so there should be no side loading at all. This is really just to hold it in place. And there we got the key in. Now we're just going to smoothly press down the gear. I guess the tolerance is tighter than I thought. I really did not expect this to be this tight, but at least it won't be coming off, I guess. In any case, this is how you line up the gears. You should make sure the front faces are in exactly the same spot. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, and then they have to sit and dry. All right, so we're back, and it has been overnight, and the green Loctite on here should be fully dry in order to close this all up. So what I'm going to do next is apply some red and tacky grease to these gears, and then we're going to use some blue Loctite and close up the gear drives with the outer case. So let me grab my grease and we'll put it on there. Well, I got all the way to the end and realized that I forgot to put the O-ring on, so this is going to be a little bit out of order, or it's going to sound out of order, but coming back to put this O-ring on, which is important to keep dust out of the enclosure. Well, so much for that. I couldn't find my red and tacky grease, so we're going to be continuing without grease, which, for the record, is not technically a problem. You can run straight cut gears, especially steel ones, without grease. They'll just be ungodly loud, which is fine. And there's a chance they wear down a little bit faster, but you know, the grease gets flung off inside of the case anyway over time, so I'm not too worried about it. So we're gonna put on the case here, and then we'll put some blue Loctite on the bolts and get them screwed down. For this, we're going to be using our M3 by 10s or 12s. Yeah, the M3 by 12s. And we're gonna be using blue Loctite 243. Get those set up. Healthy amount. I will have to be disassembling this eventually to paint and stuff, so if one of these comes out, I'm not too worried about it, but I might as well put some on here since we're assembling it for the first time. And that is the 3 front screws, and then there's one on the back side here to get. There are now 6 screws left, 6 M4 by 10s to be specific, and those are for connecting the wheel plates onto the gear drive. So these will be connected and blue Loctite applied in the triangle pattern. Now we have a working gear drive. And to attach these to the wheels, I actually have these plates that I designed because the screws on the Meepo gear drives are actually going the wrong direction. So this is going to go onto here and slot into this plate, and then this will be screwed onto the actual Meepo tubeless wheel. So that's about it. I'm gonna go put the plate on the other side, and that's pretty much all of the mechanical assembly completed. Alrighty, so after much ado, we are here with a fully assembled drive system, and it looks really awesome. I think that there's possibilities for some issues in a couple areas with clearance, but I think we're going to be okay. And when I end up reassembling this later, I will try some advice that some other people in my group chat have given me. So I think this is looking really cool, especially with these tubeless wheels. Let me just show you the adapter that I made for them. Basically, I have an adapter on here that I designed that screws into the hub of the wheel and then has screws in it that slot into the holes on the Board Dynamics adapter. So I pumped up the tires to their 30-something PSI, and we're gonna let them sit for a while, and hopefully they hold air. And if they do, then I'll be good to ride on them. For now, I'm waiting for my bearings to come. I needed to get some 22 by 10 bearings. So until those come, I won't be able to do any riding, but we still get a lot to do before I ride. Now, being the first video, this is just the drivetrain assembly and that introduction. So feel free to leave any comments in the section down below, any questions, any concerns, suggestions, etc. I'll love to hear any of that, and I'll answer them as they come in. As for the next video, our next video will be installing the inserts and the battery enclosure and plugging it all together. So that'll be really awesome, and I'm going to start recording that right after this, and let me get on editing. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.